As we continue our discussion on activity-based costing, one question that I think people might have is, boy, I'm using conventional cost accounting methods. I'm interested in activity-based costing, but how much effort, time, money does it take for me to get at least started down a path where I can enjoy the benefits that we've talked about?
Well, if you're using traditional cost accounting, you may be able to spend just a few hours and get some of the benefits of activity-based costing. You might remember that you and I, back in 1998, did a back-of-the-envelope analysis of your launch cost, and we had significantly better information as a result of having a discussion that probably didn't last more than an hour.
Right. Right.
In the early days of activity-based costing, people who were writing about this said that you needed to understand the cost of everything you did.
Right.
And companies attempting to do this in those early days were sometimes spending man-years trying to understand their cost. Today, we know that you don't need to understand everything, you only need to understand the big hitters. For example, traditional cost accounting thinks in terms of three categories of cost: materials, labor, and overhead. If you were to take time to understand 5 categories of cost, such as launch cost and setup cost, you would have a competitive advantage over a company that only understood 3 categories of cost. If you understood 7, you'd have a competitive advantage over a company that understood 5. If you understood 12, you have a competitive advantage over a company that knows 7. But the law of diminishing returns applies. Once you've looked at about 12 categories of cost for your company's major activities, then you've probably looked at well over 95% of your company's cost structure. So a company that looked at 20 categories of cost wouldn't have a competitive advantage over a company that looked at 12. A company of your size, depending on how good your data was, that is, if you had available the statistics that drive activity-based costing, an activity-based costing analysis you might be able to do in a few man-weeks.
Yeah, yeah. And it's interesting because I do remember those early years, and as you mentioned, we really just spent a couple hours talking about a couple key things, and I think our first model went from 3 to 5, and we've evolved. We're on our 4th generation model working with John, and we're up to about 12 variables. And I would agree, that's starting to get probably about right. The key, I think, is that you really have to identify your main cost drivers and really be able to have an internal meeting. Again, a couple hours, you could probably hammer out what you need to look at, a couple more hours to get some raw data, and you're on your way. So it really is a good first step is try to identify a couple of the breakouts out of your overhead, and you're on your way.